In a distant galaxy, far beyond the reach of most civilizations, there existed an unusual institution, a school unlike any other. This was no ordinary academy where young aliens studied advanced mathematics or interstellar diplomacy. Instead, it was known as Deathworlders School, infamous across the cosmos for teaching its students the harshest truths about humanity's darkest side: war and survival. The story begins with Zixlar, a curious amphibian-like alien from the swampy planet Vortok Prime. His species communicated through glowing patterns on their skin, flashing colors that conveyed emotions and thoughts faster than words ever could. Zixlar had always been fascinated by stories of Earth, a small blue-green planet tucked away in one corner of the Milky Way. To him, Earth seemed unremarkable. Its skies were pale compared to the vibrant hues of his homeworld, and its landscapes lacked the towering crystal forests he called home. Yet despite its simplicity, Earth held a reputation among the stars. It was the birthplace of humanity, a species feared not just for its technology, but for something deeper, something primal, its ability to wage relentless, brutal warfare. When Zixlar arrived at Deathworlders School alongside his classmates, a diverse group of creatures hailing from every corner of the universe, he felt both excitement and unease. The campus itself was deceptively serene, nestled in a valley surrounded by jagged mountains. Strange plants grew everywhere, some emitting faint glows, others releasing puffs of shimmering spores when disturbed. Despite the beauty, there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. Even the instructors, stern humanoid figures clad in military fatigues, carried themselves with a grim authority that made Zixlar's scales bristle nervously. On the first day, the students gathered in a large auditorium carved into the mountain. Holographic projections filled the space, showing scenes of battles stretching across human history. Primitive tribes clashed with spears and stones. Knights charged into battle atop armored horses. Soldiers fired rifles over muddy trenches, and sleek drones zipped through modern skies. Each image sent shivers down Zixlar's spine. He watched as entire cities burned, oceans turned red with blood, and deserts became graveyards littered with broken machines. The sheer scale of destruction left him speechless. "This is what you have come here to learn," boomed Instructor Kale, a grizzled human veteran whose voice carried the weight of countless wars. "Warfare is not just strategy, it is chaos. Humanity has mastered this chaos, bending it to their will. If you wish to understand them and survive, you must do the same." Zixlar glanced around at his fellow students. There was Trelk, a towering insectoid warrior with 6 limbs and mandibles that clicked rhythmically when he spoke. Beside him sat Lyran, a soft-spoken being covered in translucent membranes that fluttered gently whenever she moved. Then there was Voxin, a gelatinous creature who floated silently above the ground, his form shifting constantly like liquid smoke. Each of them came from vastly different worlds, yet they shared a common goal: to comprehend the enigma that was humanity. The presentation continued. Zixlar struggled to process everything he saw. War, as depicted by these holograms, wasn't just about winning or losing. It was messy, unpredictable, and devastating. Humans didn't fight fair. They used deception, fear, and sheer determination to crush their enemies. They adapted quickly, turning even the smallest advantage into a weapon. And perhaps most unsettling of all, they never gave up. No matter how dire the situation, humans kept fighting until either victory or annihilation claimed them. After the introductory lecture, the students were led outside to begin their first lesson. The training ground sprawled across acres of rugged terrain, dotted with trenches, barricades, and ruined structures. Explosions echoed in the distance, though Zixlar soon realized these were controlled simulations meant to mimic real combat scenarios. Their task? Navigate through the battlefield while avoiding traps, ambushes, and automated defenses designed to test their reflexes and decision-making skills. From the start, things went poorly. Trelk charged ahead recklessly, only to trigger a hidden mine that sent him sprawling backward. Lyran froze in terror when a drone swooped low overhead, its mechanical whirring sounding like the buzz of predatory insects from her homeworld. Voxen fared slightly better, using his fluid body to slip through narrow gaps and evade detection. But Zixlar found himself paralyzed by indecision. Every step forward felt like walking into a trap. Every shadow seemed to hide danger. He couldn't shake the feeling that this place was alive, watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. It wasn't long before reality hit hard. During one particularly intense exercise, Zixlar stumbled upon a simulated village overrun by enemy forces. The scene was horrifying. Buildings reduced to rubble, bodies strewn across the streets, and cries of pain echoing from survivors trapped beneath debris. For a moment, Zixlar forgot it was all fake. The raw emotion in those screams pierced through his logical mind, leaving him shaken. When an instructor barked orders to move forward and secure the area, Zixlar hesitated. How could anyone keep going after witnessing such suffering? But hesitation wasn't an option here. As he lingered, frozen in place, another student, a reptilian creature named Scar, pushed past him, firing bursts of energy at simulated foes. "You'll die if you don't act," Scar shouted over the noise. Reluctantly, Zixlar followed suit, forcing himself to focus on the mission. By the time they completed the exercise, his hands trembled, and his bioluminescent glow had dimmed considerably. Something inside him had shifted, though he couldn't quite put it into words. By Dio, the end of the day, exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone. Many students bore injuries, some minor, others severe, from accidents during the drills. A few had already dropped out, unable to handle the stress. Back in their dormitory, Zixlar lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The faint hum of machinery and occasional groans from injured classmates filled the room. He thought about the holograms, the exercises, and the chilling words of Instructor Kale. Survival demands brutality. For the first time since arriving, Zixlar questioned whether he belonged here. Was understanding humanity worth enduring this? Could he really become someone capable of thriving in such chaos? These doubts swirled in his mind as sleep finally claimed him, dragging him into uneasy dreams of fire and screams. Little did Zixlar know this was only the beginning. The lessons awaiting him would grow darker, more challenging, and infinitely more personal. But deep down, buried beneath layers of fear and uncertainty, a spark of curiosity remained. Perhaps, he thought, there was more to humanity than just war. Perhaps amidst the brutality there was also a reason why humans fought so fiercely. For love, for freedom, for hope. Whatever the truth might be, Zixlar resolved to find out, even if it meant confronting his own limits along the way. The next morning at Deathworlders school began with an ominous silence. The usual hum of machinery and chatter among students was replaced by a heavy stillness, as if the campus itself was holding its breath. Zixlar woke to find his bioluminescent glow flickering weakly, a reflection of his inner turmoil. He had spent the night haunted by dreams of fire and screams, images that lingered like shadows in his mind. As he prepared for another day of training, he couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. Breakfast was a tense affair. The dining hall buzzed with nervous energy as students exchanged stories about their first day. Some boasted about surviving ambushes or outsmarting automated defenses, while others sat quietly, nursing wounds both physical and emotional. Trelk, the towering insectoid warrior, was unusually subdued after losing 2 limbs during a simulation and having them hastily reattached by medical drones. Even Liraean, who rarely spoke, seemed distant, her translucent membranes fluttering erratically as though she were trying to escape her own thoughts. When the group gathered for their morning briefing, Instructor Kale stood before them with a grim expression etched onto his scarred face. "Yesterday," he began, "was just the appetizer. Today we move on to the main course." With a wave of his hand, holographic displays sprang to life around the room, showing maps of dense jungles, arid deserts, and sprawling urban landscapes. Each environment came alive with simulated battles, soldiers taking cover behind rubble, tanks rolling through streets, and fighter jets streaking across skies. "Human warfare is not confined to one type of terrain," Kyle explained coldly. You must learn to adapt to any setting, because your enemy will exploit every weakness you show. Adaptation is survival. Zixlar felt his stomach tighten. Adaptation sounded simple enough in theory, but in practice it meant facing unpredictable challenges that tested not only their skills but also their resolve. And today's lesson promised to be particularly brutal. Operation Endurance. Operation Endurance started with the students being dropped into separate zones designed to mimic Earth's harshest environments. Zixlar found himself in a scorching desert littered with jagged rocks and endless dunes. The heat pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket, making each step feel heavier than the last. His amphibian physiology wasn't built for such conditions, and within minutes his skin began to dry out, causing sharp cracks to form along his scales. Desperation clawed at him as he realized hydration would be critical to surviving even the shortest time here. To make matters worse, the desert wasn't empty. Hidden beneath the sand were motion sensors rigged to trigger explosive devices. Every movement Zixlar made sent ripples through the ground, risking detection. He tried moving cautiously, lifting his webbed feet high above the surface to minimize disturbance, but progress was agonizingly slow. Sweat, or what passed for sweat in his species, pooled under his scales, further weakening him. As hours dragged on, exhaustion set in. Hunger gnawed at his insides and thirst burned like fire in his throat. Just when he thought he couldn't go on, he spotted something glinting in the distance, a metal canteen half buried in the sand. Hope surged through him as he staggered toward it, ignoring the growing pain in his legs. But as soon as he reached for the canteen, a loud beep echoed around him. Before he could react, a small explosion erupted beneath his feet, sending him flying backward. When Zixlar regained consciousness, his body ached all over, and his vision swam with spots of light. Medical drones hovered nearby, ready to stabilize him if needed, but they didn't intervene unless absolutely necessary. Pain was part of the learning process, Kale had warned earlier. Gritting his teeth, Zixlar forced himself upright. The canteen lay tantalizingly close, untouched by the blast. This time he approached it more carefully, scanning the area for additional traps. After several tense moments, he managed to grab it without incident. Inside was water. Not much, but enough to keep him going for now. Relief washed over him briefly, but it was short-lived. As he continued navigating the desert, he encountered other obstacles. Mirages that lured him off course, sandstorms that obscured visibility, and robotic predators programmed to hunt intruders. Each challenge pushed him closer to his breaking point, forcing him to dig deep for reserves of strength he didn't know he had. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the simulation, his classmates faced equally harrowing trials. Trelk battled swarms of mechanical insects in a dense jungle, their razor-sharp wings slicing through foliage and flesh alike. Lyraean struggled to navigate icy tundra where freezing winds threatened to tear her delicate membranes apart. Voxen floated through a flooded city, dodging collapsing buildings and hostile drones patrolling the murky waters. Communication between teams was forbidden, leaving everyone isolated and vulnerable. Despite the chaos, there were moments of unexpected camaraderie. At one point, Zixlar stumbled upon Scar, the reptilian warrior from yesterday's exercise. Both were battered and dehydrated, but instead of competing for resources, they formed a temporary alliance. Together, they devised strategies to avoid traps and share supplies. For the first time since arriving at Deathworlders school, Zixlar felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, cooperation could be as powerful as brute force. But alliances were fragile things in this world. When night fell, plunging the desert into pitch darkness, paranoia crept in. Shadows danced menacingly, and every sound, from the howl of the wind to the crunch of shifting sand, seemed like an impending attack. Exhaustion clouded Zixlar's judgment, and doubt whispered insidious thoughts into his mind. What if Scar turned on him? What if the water supply ran out? Their partnership dissolved quickly after a heated argument over rationing. Words escalated into threats, and before long, they parted ways, each retreating into solitude. alone once again. Zixler trudged forward, his glowing patterns dimming further with each passing hour. By dawn, he was barely recognizable as the curious, optimistic alien who had arrived at the school days ago. Back in the real world, instructors monitored the simulations closely, analyzing every decision the students made. They noted who adapted quickly, who relied on instinct, and who crumbled under pressure. Failure wasn't tolerated lightly. Those who couldn't keep up risked expulsion, or worse, permanent injury. By the time the exercise ended, most students returned to base in varying states of disarray. Some limped back, supported by medical drones, while others collapsed entirely, requiring immediate attention. Zixlar was among the latter. As he lay on a stretcher, his cracked scales mended by nanobots and fluids pumped into his system, he reflected on what he'd learned. Survival wasn't just about physical endurance. It required mental fortitude, creativity, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. Instructor Kale addressed the group later that evening, his tone as harsh as ever. "You survived today, but survival isn't enough. Tomorrow we'll push harder. You'll face enemies smarter, faster, and deadlier than anything you've encountered so far. Remember this: humanity doesn't fight fair. If you want to understand them and survive, you need to be willing to do whatever it takes." Zixler listened silently, his glowing patterns flickering faintly. He knew Kale was right. Humanity's brutality wasn't just about weapons or tactics, it was about mindset. And though he still questioned whether he belonged here, one thing was certain: he couldn't afford to give up now. Not when the lessons ahead might hold answers to the questions gnawing at his soul. As the lights dimmed in the dormitory that night, Zixlar stared at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in his mind. He thought about the desert, the explosions, the fleeting alliance with Scar, and the crushing isolation that followed. Though battered and bruised, he resolved to keep going, to endure whatever came next. Because somewhere amidst the chaos, he believed there was meaning waiting to be uncovered, and perhaps understanding humanity's darkest truths would ultimately lead him to discover his own brightest potential. The days at Deathworlders school blurred together, each one more grueling than the last. Zixlar's body bore the scars of countless battles, both simulated and real, and his mind was a labyrinth of conflicting emotions. He had learned to adapt, to survive, and even to fight back when cornered. But nothing could have prepared him for what came next: Operation Unity. Operation Unity wasn't just another training exercise. It was a test of loyalty, trust, and betrayal, a cruel mirror reflecting humanity's darkest tendencies. The students were divided into squads, each tasked with infiltrating a fortified human settlement while fending off rival teams. What made this mission especially brutal was the inclusion of betrayal mechanics. At random intervals, certain squad members would receive secret orders to sabotage their own team. Chaos was inevitable, and survival depended not only on skill but also on paranoia. Zixlar found himself grouped with a mix of familiar faces and new recruits. There was Trelk, who despite losing 2 limbs in earlier exercises, still carried an intimidating presence. Liren floated nearby, her translucent membranes fluttering nervously as she adjusted to the weight of her weapon. Scar stood silently, his reptilian eyes scanning the group with suspicion. And then there was Voxen, whose fluid form shimmered faintly under the dim lights of their briefing room. Their instructor, a cold-eyed human named Commander Voss, laid out the rules with ruthless clarity. "Trust no one," he said, his voice cutting through the tense air. "Your teammates may turn on you at any moment. If they do, eliminate them or be eliminated yourself." The words hung heavily in the room, sinking into the hearts of the students like stones dropped into water. Betrayal wasn't just a possibility, it was a certainty. The simulation began with the squads parachuting into a dense forest surrounding the target settlement. Trees loomed overhead, their branches tangled like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. Fog rolled across the ground, obscuring visibility and muffling sound. It was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant howl of a mechanical predator programmed to patrol the area. Zixalar's squad moved cautiously, sticking close together as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Communication was sparse, each member wary of revealing too much information. Trust was already beginning to erode, though no one dared speak of it aloud. Every snap of a twig or shift in movement sent waves of tension rippling through the group. For the first hour, everything seemed to go according to plan. They avoided detection from enemy patrols, dismantled traps hidden along their path, and reached the outskirts of the settlement without incident. But as they approached the outer walls, disaster struck. A sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet, sending shards of shrapnel flying in every direction. Panic erupted as everyone scrambled for cover. "What happened?" Trelk barked, his mandibles clicking furiously as he scanned the chaos around them. "It came from behind us," Scar growled, pointing toward the tree line. Sure enough, smoke curled upward from where they had been moments before. Before anyone could react further, Voxen's form shifted abruptly, becoming opaque and rigid. His glowing core pulsed red, a sign that he had received a betrayal order. Without warning, he lunged at Liren, wrapping his amorphous body around hers in a suffocating grip. She screamed, her membranes flaring wildly as she struggled to break free. "Voxen, stop!" Zixalar shouted, rushing forward to intervene. But Trelk beat him to it, swinging his massive claws with deadly precision. One strike cleaved through Voxen's gelatinous form, causing it to collapse into a puddle of inert liquid. Liren gasped for breath, trembling as she pulled herself away from the remains of her former teammate. Betrayal had come swiftly, and its aftermath left the group fractured. Accusations flew like arrows, each word sharp and accusing. "Why didn't you see it coming?" Scar snarled at Zixalar, his reptilian gaze filled with distrust. "You were supposed to watch our backs." "I didn't know," Zixalar protested, his bioluminescent glow flickering erratically. "None of us did." Lyrian remained silent, her fluttering membranes betraying her fear. She clutched her weapon tightly, her wide eyes darting between her remaining teammates. The unity they had once shared was gone, replaced by suspicion and hostility. As the mission progressed, the situation grew worse. Another explosion tore through their ranks, this time taking out half of the wall they were trying to breach. Enemy drones descended upon them, firing relentless bursts of energy. In the chaos, Zixalar spotted movement in the corner of his vision. Trelk slipping away from the group, heading toward a concealed entrance. Was he trying to complete the mission alone, or had he received another betrayal order? "Trelk, wait!" Zixalar called out, chasing after him. But the insectoid warrior ignored him, disappearing into the shadows. Moments later, gunfire erupted from inside the settlement, followed by the unmistakable sound of Trelk's battle cry. Zixalar hesitated, torn between following him and staying with Liren and Scar. In the end, he chose the latter. Together, the three of them regrouped and pressed onward, fighting their way through waves of enemies. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just because of physical exhaustion, but because of the growing weight of mistrust. Every decision was scrutinized, every action questioned, yet somehow they managed to reach the settlement's central command hub, the objective of their mission. But victory came at a cost. When they finally secured the area, only Zixalar, Liren, and Scar remained standing. Trelk lay lifeless outside the entrance, his body riddled with bullet holes. Voxen's remains were scattered across the forest floor, and several other squads had been wiped out entirely. As the simulation ended and the holographic projections faded, leaving behind the sterile confines of the training facility, the survivors returned to base hollow-eyed and haunted. That night, Zixalar sat alone in the dormitory, staring at his hands. They were steady now, but he could still feel the tremors that had gripped him during the mission. Betrayal wasn't something he had ever encountered back on Vortok Prime. Among his people, trust was sacred, reinforced by the bioluminescent bonds they formed with one another. To break that bond was unthinkable. But here, among humans and their brutal ways, betrayal was just another tool in the arsenal of war. He thought about Trelk, who had fought so fiercely until the very end. About Voxen, whose betrayal had shattered whatever fragile trust existed within the group, and about Liren and Scar, who still eyed each other with wary glances, unsure if the next order would pit them against one another. Humanity's capacity for cruelty was vast, but so too was its ability to endure such pain. As sleep finally claimed him, Zixlar dreamed, not of fire and screams this time, but of Earth itself. He saw glimpses of its cities, its oceans, its people. Some fought with weapons, others with words. Some smiled warmly, offering kindness even in the face of despair. Others wore masks of hatred, lashing out at anything that crossed their path. Humanity was a paradox, capable of both unimaginable destruction and profound beauty. When morning came, Zixlar rose with a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, humanity's wars were brutal, chaotic, and unforgiving. But perhaps understanding them meant more than learning how to fight. Perhaps it meant finding the light amidst the darkness, the hope that drove humans to keep going, even when all seemed lost. And so, as the sun rose over Deathworlders school, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape, Zixlar prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. For better or worse, he was beginning to understand humanity, not just as warriors, but as beings shaped by love, loss, and the unyielding will to survive. As the weeks turned into months, Zixlar and his fellow students grew increasingly hardened by their experiences at Deathworlders school. They had endured brutal simulations, faced betrayal from allies, and witnessed the devastating cost of warfare. But none of that prepared them for what came next: immersion. It was the final phase of their training, a test unlike any other. Instead of controlled environments or holographic projections, they would be sent to live among humans during times of conflict. This wasn't just about observing, it was about experiencing humanity's wars firsthand. Zixlar landed in a war-torn city on Earth, a place where the air smelled of smoke and despair. Buildings lay in ruins, their skeletal frames jutting out against a gray sky. Streets were littered with debris, broken glass, twisted metal, and remnants of lives shattered beyond repair. The ground trembled occasionally as distant explosions echoed through the city, each blast sending plumes of dust spiraling into the air. For Zixlar, who had only seen such destruction in simulations, the reality was overwhelming. His mission was simple yet daunting: blend in, observe, and survive. To do this, he wore a disguise that mimicked human features. A thin layer of synthetic skin stretched over his amphibian body, complete with clothing scavenged from abandoned shops. He carried a small translator device embedded in his throat, allowing him to understand and mimic human speech. Despite these precautions, every step felt like walking on thin ice. One wrong move, one slip-up, and his cover could be blown. On his first day, Zixlar wandered cautiously through the streets, taking in the sights and sounds around him. Refugees huddled together in makeshift shelters, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow with exhaustion. Children played amidst the rubble, using scraps of metal as toys. Soldiers patrolled the area, their weapons slung over shoulders tense with readiness. The atmosphere was heavy with grief, anger, and fear, a cocktail of emotions that made Zixlar's bioluminescent glow flicker erratically beneath his disguise. It was during one of these patrols that he met Kira. Kira was a young girl, no older than 10, with tangled hair and clothes patched together from whatever fabric she could find. Her face was smeared with dirt, but her smile was radiant, lighting up the gloom like a beacon. She approached Zixlar hesitantly at first, clutching a piece of bread in her hand. "Are you hungry?" she asked softly, holding it out toward him. Zixlar froze, unsure how to respond. Accepting food might seem suspicious, but refusing could offend her. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded slightly and took the bread. "Thank you," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. Kira grinned wider, clearly pleased with herself. Over the next few days, Kira became a constant presence in Zixlar's life. She followed him as he explored the city, chattering endlessly about everything from her favorite games to stories about her family. Through her, Zixlar began to see a different side of humanity. Not the warriors or strategists he had studied, but ordinary people struggling to hold on to hope in the face of unimaginable loss. One afternoon, Kira led him to a hidden corner of the city where a group of children had gathered. They were playing a game, laughing and shouting despite the chaos surrounding them. Watching them, Zixlar felt a pang of something unfamiliar, longing. These children, who had known nothing but war, still found joy in the smallest things. Their resilience was astonishing, almost alien to him, but the peace didn't last long. Days later, an airstrike hit the neighborhood, reducing entire blocks to rubble. Zixlar ran toward the sound of collapsing buildings, his heart pounding wildly. When he reached Kira's home, all he found was devastation. Flames licked at the remains of the structure, and the acrid smell of burning wood filled the air. Amidst the wreckage, Kira sat motionless, cradling the charred remains of her younger brother. Tears streamed down her face, leaving clean streaks through the grime. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zixlar felt utterly powerless. There was nothing he could do to undo what had happened, no words that could ease her pain. All he could offer was silence and his presence. He knelt beside her, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. She didn't push him away, but neither did she acknowledge him. Together they sat amidst the ruins, surrounded by the echoes of a tragedy too vast to comprehend. That night, Zixlar returned to his hiding spot, a cramped alcove beneath a collapsed building. His disguise was beginning to wear thin, both physically and emotionally. The synthetic skin itched uncomfortably, and the weight of Kira's grief pressed heavily on his chest. As he stared up at the stars visible through gaps in the rubble, he thought about everything he had seen. Humanity's capacity for cruelty was undeniable. They waged wars that destroyed cities, families, and futures. Yet, even in the darkest moments, there was light. Kira's kindness, the laughter of children, the determination of refugees to rebuild their lives, all of it spoke to something deeper, something worth understanding. When his immersion period ended, Zixlar returned. To Deathworlders, school changed in ways he couldn't fully articulate. His classmates noticed immediately. His once vibrant bioluminescence had dimmed permanently, replaced by a muted glow that seemed to carry the weight of countless memories. During debriefings, he spoke little about his experiences, choosing instead to listen to others share their stories. Some students recounted witnessing acts of heroism, soldiers sacrificing themselves to save civilians, doctors working tirelessly to treat the wounded, strangers banding together to protect one another. Others described horrors that left them questioning whether humanity deserved to survive. A few broke down entirely, unable to reconcile the beauty and brutality they had observed. Instructor Kale listened silently, his expression unreadable. When everyone had spoken, he addressed the group. "You've seen the truth now," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Humanity isn't defined solely by its wars. It is a species capable of great love and great hatred, often simultaneously. Understanding them means accepting both. Zixlar nodded slowly, his thoughts drifting back to Kira. She had shown him kindness even when she had little to give. She had smiled despite losing nearly everything. And though her world had been torn apart, she hadn't given up, not completely. That resilience, that refusal to let despair consume her, was perhaps humanity's greatest strength. As the days passed, Zixlar began preparing for graduation. The ceremony loomed ahead, marking the end of their time at Deathworlders school. But for Zixlar, it wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. He realized now why humanity fought so fiercely. It wasn't just for survival, it was for connection, for meaning, for the fleeting moments of happiness that made life worth living. And though he couldn't undo the suffering he had witnessed, he vowed to honor Kira's memory by carrying those lessons with him. If there was hope to be found in humanity's darkest hours, then maybe there was hope for the rest of the galaxy too. The final days at Deathworlders school were filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Graduation was approaching, and for Zixlar, it marked not just the end of his training, but also the culmination of everything he had learned about humanity, its brutality, its resilience, and its capacity for both destruction and hope. The lessons had been harsh, often leaving scars that would never fully heal, but they had also shaped him in ways he hadn't anticipated. On the eve of graduation, the students gathered in the same auditorium where their journey had begun months ago. The room was dimly lit, the holographic displays now silent and inactive. Gone were the images of battles stretching across centuries. Instead, the walls reflected nothing but shadows cast by the flickering lights overhead. Each student carried themselves differently than before. Some walked taller, hardened by what they'd endured, while others shuffled quietly, weighed down by memories they couldn't escape. Zixalar stood near the back of the room, his glowing patterns subdued yet steady. He watched as his classmates exchanged quiet words, some offering congratulations, others sharing stories one last time. Trelk's repaired limbs creaked slightly as he shifted his weight, his mandibles clicking softly in thought. Liren floated silently, her translucent membranes fluttering gently as though she were trying to keep calm. Scar leaned against a wall, his reptilian eyes scanning the crowd with suspicion, even now unwilling to let his guard down. Boxen's absence lingered like an unspoken wound, a reminder of how quickly trust could be shattered. When Instructor Kale entered the room, the murmurs died instantly. His presence commanded respect, not through fear but through the sheer weight of experience etched into every line of his scarred face. Tonight, however, there was no lecture, no orders barked with cold authority. Instead, Kyle simply nodded toward the center of the room and said, "Speak." One by one, the students stepped forward to share their reflections, not just on what they had learned, but on who they had become. Some spoke of the friendships forged in the crucible of war, bonds stronger than steel despite being tested by betrayal. Others recounted moments of failure, the times they had faltered under pressure or lost teammates due to their own mistakes. Each story was unique, yet all shared a common thread: transformation. Trelk went first, his deep voice resonating through the quiet space. "I came here thinking I knew what strength meant," he began, his 6 limbs flexing involuntarily as if remembering the pain of losing 2 of them. "But humans taught me something else entirely. Strength isn't just about power, it's about endurance. It's about standing up again after you've fallen, even when every part of you wants to give up." Lyraean followed, her soft voice barely audible over the hum of machinery outside. "I used to think survival meant staying safe," she admitted, her membranes trembling faintly. "But safety doesn't exist in war. What exists is choice, whether to fight or flee, whether to help or hide. And sometimes, helping means risking everything." Scar's turn came next, his tone gruff but sincere. "Humans are unpredictable," he growled, his tail twitching irritably. "They'll stab you in the back if it serves their purpose, but they'll also risk their lives for people they don't even know. That contradiction, it's infuriating but also admirable. Maybe we're more alike than I thought." Finally, it was Zixalar's turn. He hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When he finally stepped forward, his bioluminescent glow brightened slightly, casting a pale light across the room. "Before coming here," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion swirling within him, "I believed understanding humanity meant learning how to fight like them. I thought their wars defined them. That brutality was all they were capable of." He paused, glancing around at his classmates, each bearing scars visible and invisible. "But then I met someone, a human girl named Kira. She lived in a city torn apart by conflict, yet she still found ways to smile, to share what little she had, to care for others, even when she had nothing left to give." His voice softened as he continued. "Kira showed me that humanity isn't just about war. It's about love, for family, for friends, for strangers. It's about finding hope in places where none should exist. And yes, it's about fighting, but not always for destruction. Sometimes it's for survival, for freedom, for a better future." As Zixalar finished speaking, the room fell silent. No one clapped or cheered. There was no need for such gestures. His words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. Even Kale, whose stern demeanor rarely cracked, gave a slight nod of approval. Afterward, the students dispersed, each retreating to their quarters for a restless night of reflection. Zixlar lay awake, staring at the ceiling as fragments of his journey replayed in his mind. He remembered the chaos of Operation Unity, the devastation of Kira's home, and the countless faces of humans he had encountered along the way. They weren't perfect beings, they were flawed, selfish, and capable of unspeakable cruelty. But they were also compassionate, courageous, and determined to hold on to hope even in the darkest hours. Morning arrived too soon, bringing with it the ceremony itself. Unlike traditional graduations, there were no caps or gowns, no speeches filled with platitudes. Instead, the students lined up in front of a massive gateway leading off campus. Beyond it lay paths diverging in every direction, each representing a different destiny awaiting those who stepped through. Instructor Kale addressed them one last time. "You leave here today not as conquerors or victims, but as witnesses," he said, his voice carrying a rare note of warmth. "Witnesses to humanity's complexity, its contradictions, and its potential. Use what you've learned wisely because the choices you make will ripple far beyond yourselves." One by one, the students crossed the threshold, disappearing into the unknown. Trelk strode confidently ahead, ready to rebuild his homeworld using the lessons of endurance he had gained. Liren floated gracefully, her membranes glowing faintly as she prepared to spread messages of peace among her people. Scar slithered away without looking back, his resolve hardened by the realization that trust must be earned, not given freely. And Voxen's memory served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of unity. Finally, it was Zixlar's turn. As he approached the gateway, he glanced back at the school one last time. Its jagged peaks loomed against the sky, a monument to suffering and growth. Though he had endured unimaginable hardships within its walls, he felt a strange sense of gratitude. Without Deathworlders' school, he might never have understood humanity, or himself as deeply as he did now. Stepping through the gateway, Zixlar emerged into a vast expanse bathed in sunlight. Before him stretched fields of vibrant green grass dotted with wildflowers, a stark contrast to the desolate landscapes he had grown accustomed to. In the distance, a river sparkled brightly, its waters flowing steadily toward the horizon. For the first time in months, Zixlar allowed himself to relax, letting the warmth of the sun seep into his scales. He didn't know exactly where he was headed, but he knew what he wanted to do. Back on Vortok Prime, his people communicated through glowing patterns, telling stories of triumph and tragedy. Now he would add new tales to their collective memory, not just of humanity's wars, but of its kindness, its resilience, and its hope. Perhaps by sharing these stories he could inspire change, not just among his kind, but across the galaxy. As Zixlar began walking, his bioluminescent glow brightened, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. With each step, he carried the lessons of humanity's brutal reality and its enduring spirit into the stars.